In this lesson, we're going to talk about transactions. But before we do, I want to do a quick review of our different types of languages that are contained in SQL. And the first one we'll review is DML. Okay, so DML, that's the abbreviation for Data Manipulation Language. Okay, that's the language we use when we're manipulating the data that's held inside of our database. Okay, so we use it when we need to retrieve things. That uses a select statement, right? When we want to retrieve data. Okay, when we want to store things by updating or inserting or modifying, deleting, insert. Anytime we're putting data into and out of our database, we're using data manipulation language, DML. The next one that we've covered already is DDL. That's data definition language. And when we do this, we're defining the structure of our database. We're defining what the tables look like. It's not the data that the tables are holding, it's the structure that holds the data. We're defining how the data is going to be stored in our database. So we use DDL to create and modify the structure of all the database objects in our database. And we've done that with create statements, alter statements, and drop statements. The third one I want to talk about, which we have not actually done yet, is DCL. Okay, DCL is data control language. That's used to create roles and permissions and referential integrity. It's used to control access to the database by securing it. Okay, so we grant people permissions to our database and we revoke permissions from our database, and that's coming up very soon. And the last one I want to mention is the one we're going to be talking about today. And that's TCL, transaction control language or transactional control language. It's used to manage transactions occurring within the database. And it uses statements like commit and rollback. Okay, so what's a transaction? So I want to imagine that you go into your bank and you ask them to take $500 out of your savings account and put it into your checking account. So the person helping you at the bank pulls up on their computer, they do a withdraw from your savings account of $500, but before they have a chance to put it into your checking account, the power goes out and the database goes down. 2 minutes later, the power comes back on. Great, everything's up and running. And you say, okay, now please do this. Take $500 out of my savings account, put it in my checking account. And they pull up your savings account and they say, well, you don't have $500 in your savings account. That $500 that was supposed to go from one account to the other is gone. It vanished into thin air. Okay, that's what we use transactions for. So a transaction is a way to say, hey, we're going to start doing this thing. And if I don't finish the transaction, meaning all the different parts, like withdrawing from one account and depositing to the other, if both of those parts don't finish, the transaction is going to go back to the way it was. We're going to roll it back. Okay. And that was exactly what would happen in that scenario I described, where the one account had a new balance update to $500 less and the power goes out. When the power goes out, the transaction's never committed. That means that it will automatically be rolled back. So how do we do them? It's actually pretty simple. We do a statement that says begin. And we can just say tran for short for transaction. So begin transaction, and we can give it a name. In this case, I'm going to call it long, because we're going to be working with a person whose last name is being changed to long. So we can give it any name we want, right? So what am I going to do? I'm going to update. Well, first, before I do it, let's do a select from, star from person.person, because I want to show you exactly what we're changing. Oh, now I realize what I was doing. Let's just go ahead and do it. We're going to be working on this table, right? Okay. I need to change somebody's name. Their new last name is long, so that's why I use that name. So let's update person.person, and we'll set last name, enter key stuck again, last name equals long. Can anybody see what's going to go wrong with us? So I'm going to execute this. Okay, 19,972 rows were affected. What happened? Okay, and I look and I forgot my where clause. Remember, we talked about that in the past for insert and update. That where clause gets to be very important. And I accidentally changed everybody in the database. Their last name got changed to long. That's not what I wanted to happen. Okay. Fortunately for me, I was using a transaction and I started the transaction, but I have not finished the transaction. So at any time, I can type the command rollback transaction, and we give it the name that we used. I am going to roll back that transaction, and it says the command completed successfully. And if I look at my database, everybody's last name is returned, right? So I started the transaction, but I never finished it, because to finish it, we have to use the command commit. And I can use the full word transaction if I want, or I can just use tran. Okay. Now, if I would have ran this command, once I ran that command, those changes would have been permanent, and everybody's last name would have been set to long, and there would be no way for me to get it back. Okay. So if we have a list of these transactions that need to happen, like withdrawing from a savings account and adding it to a checking account, we could begin the transaction. We list, we do all of our transaction, and at the very end, we commit it. Anywhere along the line, if something happens, the database will automatically do a rollback in case of a power outage or disconnection. Okay? But anytime along the line, if we mess up a command, we do something wrong, we can roll back as long as we have not committed it yet. Okay? So that's really the whole idea behind a transaction. It's only a few statements. A begin transaction, you can roll it back at any time, but when you're finally done, you commit it. All right, let's try another example. Begin transaction. We'll call this name change. And I want to update the person.person table. And I want to set first name. I'm going to change somebody's name. To Jack. Where their current first name is equal to Terry and last name equals Duffy. Okay, so where is Terry Duffy in here? If you look, Terry Duffy is this guy right here. Terry Duffy changed his name from Terry to Jack. Maybe Jack's his nickname. I don't know. All right, so we're going to try to do this. However, I don't have a commit statement in here. I'm going to execute it. Okay, now I'm going to do a new query. And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to do a select. And the reason I do a new query is because the database is treating this like a new person connecting to the database. I'm going to do a select star from person.person where business entity ID is equal to 2. And if you remember, that was Terry Duffy, right? So I'm going to hit execute on this. Notice what's happening. Executing query. All I'm doing is a simple select statement on one row of one table in our database. And look at that, executing query. Okay. It's not going to complete. Why isn't it completing? Okay. Because the first user went to use the database and they are updating that row in the database. And it's in the middle of a transaction. Now, if I let somebody else change the same row at the same time in any way, or even read the row, they could get incorrect results. Or if they're both doing a transaction, both changing data in that row, who's going to win? Okay, so the first person that tries it, we're in this transaction, we've started updating this row. We might have more transactions to do. But while we're doing this, that row is locked. Okay, that row is locked. Nobody else can read it. Nobody else can write to it. And you can see over here, this statement is not running. Okay, so this is called transaction locking. We lock the records that we're working with to make sure nobody else is trying to read or write them at the same time. Okay, so when is this one going to finish? Let me see if I can get both of these on the screen at once. There's probably a better way to do that. But I have both of these on the screen. Okay, and here's my original that I ran. And remember, this one is waiting on this one to finish. It's not going to allow us to finish this select statement until this transaction has been committed. So I'm going to say commit tran name change. Now I'm going to execute this. Okay, and you see as quickly as I executed that, all of a sudden the select statement over here finished. Okay, so while that transaction was happening, everybody was locked out of the records we were working with, and that's transaction locking. That's it. That's all there is to it. So commit, roll back to undo things, and begin transaction to start things. Right, that's the 3 commands of TCL. And that's basically all there is to it at this level. That's all you need to understand. So there's not even really an assignment for this week. I want you to send me a screenshot showing me that you actually did the assignment. Okay, you can take a screenshot of this showing me that you actually did it. And that's it for this week. Make sure you understand the beginning of a transaction, how to roll it back, and how to commit it.